you hear the ding. Hi, I'm Lee Evans, coming to you live from Gulf Coast Swagger Studios in Long Beach, Mississippi. And if you're new here, welcome. And if you've been with me through the first 2 episodes, thank you. This series is intentionally building. This show exists for one reason. Because right now, organizations are buying more technology, collecting more data, and experimenting with AI faster than ever before. And yet, many leaders are struggling to turn any of that into clear, defensible business outcomes. Not because the tools don't work, not because the data isn't valuable, and not because teams aren't working hard, but because the systems, the metrics, and the teams are operating them are no longer aligned. And today's episode is about something that sounds so simple until you're the one in the meeting trying to explain it. And that's metrics. More specifically, why vanity metrics are collapsing, why they lasted as long as they did, and how leaders shift to value metrics, the kind that actually correlate to growth, trust, and revenue. So if you've ever sat in a meeting staring at the dashboard thinking, okay, these numbers say we are winning, so why does it still feel like we're losing? This episode then is for you. So let's talk about this quiet KPI collapse and what it really means. There's a quiet collapse happening in marketing right now. Quiet because nothing looks broken. Dashboards, they're still full. Reports, they're still being delivered. Charts still show trending. And yet, fewer leaders actually believe what they're seeing. In fact, 71% of marketers struggle to connect campaign metrics to actual business outcomes, according to eMarketer's 2025 report. Imagine that. 71% of marketers are still struggling with that, not being able to tie those 2 things together. And that's not a small number. That's a crisis of confidence hiding in plain sight. And you can't hear it, and you can hear it in executive conversations. We had a great engagement, but revenue didn't move. Traffic is up, but the pipeline is flat. Our campaigns performed, but retention's still slipping. We're doing more and more and more, but it's not translating. Vanity metrics are collapsing. Not because the marketing is failing, but because measurement did. That feeling, that mismatch is the signal. And this isn't a story about bad marketers. It's a story about measurement failure. AI didn't break your metrics. It exposed the fragile ones. And this is the most important truth in this entire episode. AI didn't break marketing. It exposed the weakest metrics. At this point, impressions are basically the marketing version of saying, I waved at someone from across the parking lot, so we're basically friends. Done that before? Maybe I have too. And so why are smart leaders still chasing vanity metrics? This is where we really got to look at this. And this is the part where most podcasts won't say it out loud. Vanity metrics didn't survive because leaders are naive. They survived because they work emotionally, politically, and optically. Vanity metrics feel safe. They're visible, they're upward trending, they're really easy to explain, and they're hard to challenge quickly. They let leaders walk into meetings with confidence, even if something feels off underneath. Vanity metrics are the corporate version of turning the music up because the engine sounds weird. And this is human. When leaders are under pressure, board pressure, budget pressure, market pressure, they gravitate toward metrics that, 1, signal confidence, 2, reinforce control, 3, protect status, and 4, reduce perceived risk. Vanity metrics check off all 4 of those boxes. And vanity metrics survive because they're comfortable, not because they're true. And most executives aren't really chasing vanity for their ego. They're chasing certainty in environments that no longer offer it. AI is changing behavior faster than teams can document it. Privacy, fractured visibility. Attribution has blind spots that no one wants to own. So familiar metrics become anchors, but anchors become traps, especially when the environment shifts. Over time, leaders stop asking, does this reflect reality? And start asking, how can I defend this? That's the inflection point. Because when metrics become something you defend instead of something you learn from, they stop being tools. They become shields. Changing metrics isn't a reporting shift. It's a power shift. And power shifts are never neutral. Let me say this directly, especially if you are a CMO or you're a data leader. If you feel like you are constantly explaining your numbers, you don't fully trust those numbers, if meetings turn into debates instead of decisions, if your team is working harder but feels less confident, that's not because you're failing as a leader. It's because you're being asked to lead with tools that no longer tell you the truth. And that's exhausting. So now we got to look at this from the perspective of vanity metrics to value metrics. Value metrics aren't better than vanity metrics. They don't exist to make dashboards prettier. They exist to make decisions clearer. Let me put that again. They exist to make decisions clearer. Value metrics measure impact. Vanity metrics measure activity. Value metrics focus on lift, not motion. Contributions, not just the clicks. Behavior, not platform signals. Long-term growth, not short-term noise. They measure people, not platforms. 88% of ad buyers now prioritize return on ad spend and incrementality over vanity metrics, according to eMarketer in 2025. And according to eMarketer's measurement research, the 88% of ad buyers now prioritize, blah, blah, blah. Let me try that word again. They prioritize that. And they look at that reach and over frequency. That's not a coincidence. That's evolution. Once you measure impact, you can finally answer the questions leaders actually care about. Did this create new demand? Did this accelerate our pipeline? Did this increase retention? Did it improve lifetime value? Did it reduce churn? Did it build trust? Now, let's talk about what actually replaces vanity metrics, because value metrics aren't just one single KPI. They're actually a system. And this is where a lot of organizations get tripped up. They try to swap one metric for another, CTR, click-through rate, for something shinier, without changing the logic underneath. Value metrics work in layers. Each layer solves a different failure mode that executives feel every week, even if they don't always have the language for it. So I'm going to walk through these the same way I would in an executive working session, not as theory, but as why this matters and what breaks when you skip it. So the first layer, layer one, this is a signal quality metrics, the foundational point. So let me paint a picture you might recognize. You launch a campaign, beautiful creatives, great targeting, a very clear call to action, a CTA. The data comes back, 10,000 people clicked through. Great, right? But then you check your CRM. Only 3,000 people showed up. You ask sales. They say they saw 5,000 new leads. Email says 7,500 people are in the nurture flow. Same campaign, 4 different numbers. And here's the thing. Nobody's lying. Nobody's incompetent. The systems just aren't talking to each other. That's what we call a signal quality problem. And that's why it matters. If the data feeding your dashboards is fragmented, if you can't reliably recognize the same customers across channels, then every single metric downstream is built on sand. It doesn't matter how sophisticated your dashboard looks. If the foundation is guessing, everything above it is too. So, when I talk about signal quality metrics, I'm not talking about some abstract data science concepts. I'm talking about, can we trust that when marketing says 10,000, finance and sales are seeing that same 10,000? Because if we can't, decisions get slow, trust erodes, and honestly, teams start making up their own versions of the truth just to move forward. If you just had a flashback to a meeting where this exact same thing happened, you know why this layer matters. So let's move on to layer 2, which is attention depth metrics, the meaning layer. So here's a question. If someone clicked your ad but bounced in 0.8 seconds, did that click actually mean anything? CTR, click-through rate, has been the gold standard for decades. And look, I get it. Clicks are easy to count. They feel actionable. They're driving traffic. But here's what the click doesn't tell you. Did they actually notice your message? Did they process it? Did they care? Or did they tap by accident while scrolling and immediately hit the back button? This is the gap that attention depth metrics are designed to close. High attention creatives equal 2 to 3 times more predictive of revenue lift than CTR. So research shows this, that high attention creatives, those really ones that catch your eye, that hold your focus, is 2 to 3 times more predictive of revenue lift than just clicks alone. Think about that. Same impression count, same budget, but one piece of creative gets real attention and the others just get motion. The difference in business impact, 2 to 3 times. So when I say attention depth, I mean, did someone pause on your content? Did they slow their scroll? Did they watch more than 3 seconds of your video? Because attention is the bridge between creative effort and actual business results. And without measuring it, you're rewarding the stuff that gets the clicks, not the stuff that builds demand. So layer 3 moves into cross-channel consistency metrics. So we call this the alignment layer. Okay, I'll raise your hand if you've been in this meeting. Marketing walks in and says, great news, the campaign performed amazing, 25% engagement. Finance says, okay, cool, how much revenue did it drive? Analytics jumps in, well, attribution is complicated because, and then sales says, wait, we didn't see any spike in leads last week. Same campaign, same time period, 4 completely different truths. And here's the thing, nobody's wrong. Social is measuring engagement, paid is measuring clicks, email is measuring opens, sales is measuring pipeline. All of those are legitimate, but they're not comparable. It's like one team's measuring temperature in Fahrenheit and another's in Celsius. And the third team is tracking humidity and calling it heat. We do that a lot down here in the South. That's what happens without cross-channel consistency. And the consequence isn't just confusion. It's that optimization becomes local instead of strategic. Marketing optimizes for engagement. Finance optimizes for cost. Sales optimizes for speed. All rational, all necessary, but never synchronized. So when we talk about cross-channel consistency metrics, what we're really saying is, can we get everyone measuring success the same way, with the same definitions, the same time windows, the same assumptions? Because when KPIs aren't consistent, leadership can't steer. They can only arbitrate. So we move on to layer 4, which is incrementality metrics. We call it the truth layer. So this one's the uncomfortable one, but we need to talk about it. How many times have you seen a campaign get celebrated because it happened at the same time revenue went up? Here's the question nobody wants to ask out loud. Would that revenue have happened anyway? This is what incrementality is all about. And it's the metric CFOs trust when they don't trust anything else. Because incrementality doesn't ask, did the campaign get clicks? Did it look good in the deck? Did it correlate with an outcome? What it asks is, did this create net new impact, or did we just spend money on something that was already going to happen? This is the difference between correlation and causation, between taking credit and creating value. And look, I know this feels harsh. Nobody wants to find out their winning campaign didn't actually move the needle. But here's the alternative. You keep paying for activity and calling it performance. You keep celebrating motion and hoping it turns into growth. And eventually the CFO figures it out. And when that happens, they don't just cut the campaign. They cut budgets. They cut the team. They cut trust. Incrementality protects you from that because it tells you the truth before the budgeting meeting does. I know this, and I know this stings, but it's better to know that now than in a budget review. Then we move on to layer 5, which is a customer value metrics, the growth layer. Vanity metrics, again, they measure moments, they measure motion. Value metrics measure relationships. Customer value metrics focus on lifetime value, retention velocity, churn reduction, and repeat behavior. This layer forces a different leadership question. Are we building durable growth or just short-term spikes? A campaign can look incredible in the quarter and still destroy value over time. Customer value metrics prevent that. They align teams around outcomes that compound, not peaks and valleys, and not peaks that fade. Layer 6, then, we move on to it, is the revenue alignment metrics. Call it the executive layer. This is where marketing stops being a cost center and becomes a growth engine. Revenue alignment metrics tie marketing activity to your pipeline velocity, revenue contribution, CAC to LTV ratios, incremental lift by channel or experience. When marketing owns revenue aligned metrics, it gains a strategic credibility, not because it promises revenue, but because it can actually explain its contribution without defensiveness. If you need 5 minutes to explain why a KPI matters, it's not a KPI, it's trivia. And finally, layer 7, governance and trust metrics, the responsibility layer. AI changes the stakes in everything because AI doesn't just act, it scales your decisions. Governance and trust metrics answer questions like, can we explain why AI made that decision? Are we monitoring for bias and risk? Are consent and compliance intact as we scale? AI without governance doesn't scale intelligence. It scales the risk. And when trust collapses, innovation slows. How these 7 layers work together is very interesting. Together, these layers do one thing. They turn metrics from reporting artifacts into decision instruments. But here's the catch. And this is where many organizations still get stuck. Even the best value metrics fail when they live in silos. So how do we use this? And this is usually the moment when leaders think, I get it, Lee. But how do I do this without blowing everything up? Because the fear isn't change. The fear is disrupting teams in mid-quarter, invalidating work people have already done, triggering turf wars between one team and another team, or launching yet another transformation that collapses under its own weight. So let me be very clear. You do not fix metrics by declaring a multi-year overhaul. You fix metrics by resetting the rules of decision-making, deliberately, incrementally, and with guardrails. That's why this starts with a 90-day reset, not a transformation. Not because change should be slow, but because trust has to be rebuilt in stages. So we start with phase 1, and it's just a couple weeks. It's 1 to 3 weeks. You just look. And I know it sounds simple, but hear me out. The first 3 weeks, you don't fix anything. You are not optimizing anything. You are not launching anything new. You are just looking. What metrics does marketing actually use when they decide to keep a running campaign? What does finance pull up when they're asked to defend the budget? What does sales look at when they say marketing isn't working? And most importantly, where do the definitions not match? No blame, no judgment, just exposure, just looking. And here's what happens. Usually around week 2, someone in the room, they speak up and they say, wait, we've been measuring conversion 3 completely different ways? Exactly. And that's the point, because you can't align what you haven't named. And most organizations have never actually written down what each team means when they say success. So this first phase isn't about change, it's about honesty. Saying the truth without making anyone wrong. So once that 1 to 3 weeks is over, you're going to move into phase 2. And that runs about weeks 4 and 6 through 6. Create the dictionary. Once exposure is complete, once that look over is complete, and alignment can begin. This phase is about unifying your measurement logic, not building new dashboards. Key actions here include creating a single KPI dictionary that all teams can use and understand, standardizing attribution windows and assumptions, and aligning marketing metrics with finance definitions, and then agreeing on what success actually means before debating performance. This is where organizations stop optimizing locally and start optimizing together. And it's also where leadership behavior matters the most. Because the moment teams see executives defend shared definitions, even when the numbers dip, trust accelerates fast. The leadership signal here is powerful. We care more about clarity than we do about comfort. Once phase 2 is, you've got that all in place, we move on to phase 3. Weeks 7 to 9, you're going to pilot your new metrics. Only now do value metrics come fully online. Not everywhere and not all at once, but where they unlock decisions fastest. This is where teams introduce attention depth along with CTR, where they layer in incrementality for priority initiatives. Replace vanity-heavy reporting in executive decks. Begin testing creative and experience against impact, not activity. This phase is not about perfection, it's about proof. When leaders see even one decision get cleaner, faster, and more confident, momentum builds naturally. Skepticism drops, defensiveness fades, and teams start to ask better questions on their own. So phase 4, weeks 10 to 12, got to make it stick. The final phase is where measurement stops being a project and becomes how the organization operates. This includes rebuilding executive dashboards around those value metrics you defined, updating agency scorecards and incentives, training the teams on how to interpret, not just report on the metrics, establishing governance forums for metric evolution. And this is where leaders quietly regain something they didn't realize that they lost. Confidence. Not in the numbers, but in the decisions built on those numbers. So when value metrics still fail, then they can, because people are in silos. And that's an uncomfortable truth. Some organizations do everything right on paper. They retire the vanity metrics. They adopt the attention and incrementality. They align KPIs to revenue and customer value. And still, decisions feel slow. Outcomes lag. And leadership meetings turn into negotiations instead of direction. When that happens, the problem again isn't metrics. It's the silos. Value metrics fail in silos every single time. What silos actually do to metrics, they don't just slow execution. They change how metrics behave. In siloed environments, marketing optimizes for speed, analytics optimizes for precision, finance optimizes for defensibility, and IT optimizes for stability. All rational, all necessary, but rarely synchronized. So metrics stop being decision tools again and become negotiation tools. That's why meetings feel familiar. Marketing presents a strong performance. Analytics presents the caveats. Finance asks how much revenue truly was influenced. And someone mentions attribution. Someone else mentions seasonality. Someone says the algorithm changed. And suddenly the conversation isn't about growth anymore. It's about whose numbers are right. That's when dashboards stop being tools and start being arguments with charts. This isn't a people problem, it's the design problem. And there needs to be a leadership shift. And that shift actually needs to break the silos. Here's the shift that matters the most, and it's not organizational, it's behavioral. Breaking silos doesn't start with reorgs and new platforms. It starts when leadership stops asking whose numbers are right. It starts asking, what decisions are you trying to make? That single question changes everything because it forces a shared context, shared responsibility, and a shared truth. And metrics fall into place after that. Metrics don't create alignment. Alignment creates metrics. Let that one sit a little. So, let's see. If this episode did resonate with you, here's what I want you to know. Clarity comes before change. You don't fix this by asking teams to try harder. You fix it by aligning how value is defined, measured, and owned. That's why my diagnostic exists, the Convergence Factor Diagnostic. That's why the playbooks exist that we've created. Not to sell you something, but to give you a place to stand. So to get our playbooks, which are free, you can download them at first or by doing this QR code up here in the corner, or you can download them at theconvergencefactor.com/resources. And you can take our diagnostics. We have a metrics diagnostic and a convergence diagnostic at theconvergencefactor.com, or scan this QR code. And if you're ready to rebuild measurement for 2026, these both will help you start with clarity. So that's our episode for today. And in our next episode, we'll be discussing how companies are breaking that silo syndrome I just talked about. Because alignment isn't a meeting, it's an architecture. So join me for that next conversation on Wednesday, March 3rd. And I'm hoping it'll be at 12 noon, back to our 12 noon Eastern time, where we'll be talking about breaking those silo syndromes. Thanks for listening to the Convergence Factor Podcast. I'm Lee Evans, coming to you from Gulf Coast Swagger Studios here on the Gulf Coast. Until next time, I hope you'll break silos, connect systems, and drive real outcome.